So our characters, various different groups of them in different campaigns, have arrived in the area, they've had their introductory adventure, they've recovered some relics, they've had various miscellaneous encounters in the city, they've presented themselves to the Count, they've got permission to settle, they've gone up to the ruins, they've gone on a hunt with the Count, or most of them have. The Mithras group actually had nobody high enough status, so they skipped the hunt encounters. And perhaps they've started investigating what's happening in the ruins before they have a run-in with some mercenaries. Fine. Loads has happened at this point, and we've kind of got into the first full year of the campaign. So we started in 1221, and at this point we're going through winter and into spring 1222. Now, all of these things that are happening, all the discoveries they're making, the miscellaneous little stories and adventures which befall them, are all additional to their main purpose of actually being here. They're supposed to be here to set up a settlement at some ruins, and at those ruins they're going to investigate and work out what is magical, what is unusual, what are the properties of those ruins, right? Or of the waters in the ruins specifically. But all our groups approach this differently, and focusing on what we're calling the farmers and the shadows, radically different. The farmers, for example, they're content to just kind of see what happens when they use the waters, for their farming or for the herb garden that they're re-establishing here. And so to the end of spring, I kind of drop in a hint that one of the hirelings, one of the farmer type characters, the woman who looks after the herb garden, is clearing out some weed from the spring area and realises that there's a channel that goes back, that water is being fed into what they thought was a natural spring pool from some sort of channel which seems to have now been collapsed, right? So it was some sort of tunnel, roof's fallen in, now it's just some stones. Because I thought, well, they would naturally start wandering around and be looking at this. Somebody will notice this eventually. So the shadows had discovered this proactively back in autumn the year before. But I thought, right, I need to tell the farmers about this. And so they set somebody to excavating this trench and digging back into the hill and finding where the waters come from until they get to the bedrock. And into the bedrock there's an indentation and then there's a door. And the door is clearly magical in nature. It's made of stone, it has no handle, it resists attempts to use magic on it, and there is a symbol, a sort of trident and triangle symbol, which is emblazoned on it, with a triangular hole underneath it, kind of like a keyhole. And they look at it and go, oh, that looks a bit like a keyhole. I wonder what that symbol is. Maybe we'll find out one day. And they basically ignore it. So through this whole first year, they've uncovered the door and they're just going, yeah, it's got a symbol on it. Now, that's largely because they're actually getting really interested in what's happening around them and their neighbours, and they're starting to suspect that there's some sort of very dark conspiracy happening, which they're taking quite personally. So they're just not mentally focused on this. The Shadows group, on the other hand, is very focused on this. So back in autumn, they excavated back to the door. And so in winter, one of their more scholarly characters, they've got a sort of chirurgeon, surgeon who's quite well educated, he's university educated. He stomps around the county and he visits monasteries and he visits sort of local churches to try and see if this mark appears anywhere else, if it's noted in any chronicles, if it's something that the peasants know about. And by the end of this season, he's discovered that there are references to it in a chronicle that's held at St. Croix Abbey as relating to an area near Grief Castle. And when they go and talk to the peasants near Grief Castle, somebody says, "Oh yeah, I've seen a symbol like that. I'd lost a sheep, and the sheep had wandered into the woods, and it was just over that way." And so the player characters check out the woods. They find an old altar with some steps. They find inscriptions, And there begins a fairly conventional, how do you get your way into the magically protected woods? When you get in there, there's a crypt under some old ruins. Do you want to investigate it? That's optional. You find some graves that have got this symbol on it. And the player characters can go as deep on this as they want. For example, they don't have to go into the crypt under the ruins. They could just go, well, we're looking for this symbol, let's excavate this grave. And in the grave, they find the key that opens the keyhole. Very conventional kind of follow the breadcrumbs plot. And the shadows get super into this. So in spring, they're in this wood, and they're not passing up the opportunity to explore a crypt, right? And looking at the other groups, the D&D group were completely up for the crypt. The Mithras group went, that's freaky, we don't have to go in there, we're avoiding it. And again, this is partly because of the way the rules work. You know, in D&D, if you go into a crypt, you meet some undead, you reckon you'll be okay, you can heal. Mithras, you go, no, we'll avoid the unnecessary risk. But with these two main groups, the shadows and the farmers, the people that we're mainly considering for these videos, the shadows were quite bullish. They looked at this and thought, oh, there could be some loot. And they really made lives difficult for themselves. So the mages for the shadows were highly specialised. They're about to dig up a grave. They're about to go into a crypt. They have nobody who can deal with ghosts. This isn't going to go well. And when they do go into the crypt, they raise a long dead Roman priest who is angry that the shrine is being desecrated, or the crypt is being desecrated. But they look at him and think, oh, those clothes should have rotted away. I wonder if those robes are magical. Oh, we better not damage the robes. They've got with them a mage who can just create massive quantities of fire, Magnus X Flamber. They could just incinerate that priest. But they're worried about getting loot. So they end up making that fight difficult for themselves. They get absolutely battered. And then they have to deal with the ghosts out in the graveyard when they try and rob the graves. So it all goes quite badly wrong for them. They just manage to avoid losing anyone. They nearly have a fatality. But they get away completely battered and then discover that they haven't really put any forethought into wound recovery. So in Ars Magica, something that a lot of new players don't realise is how important it is to have some magical effects which speed up wound recovery. Because when you get badly injured, and these guys were, it can take a long time to recover, and there is a genuine risk of death from your wounds after the battle. So for about half of this period, they've got badly injured people. So when they come up with other issues, because they've done this whole exploration of the graveyard thing, when they come up with other issues, they find that some of the people they might want to send are injured and recovering. So they're constrained in how they respond to other issues because they've been so bullish and so optimistic in how they dealt with the attempt to recover the key. Okay. But they have got the key, and now they've opened up the door, and they found inside there's a sort of ancient set of caverns with water running through them. There's definitely things living, in inverted commas, in the waters, but they're kind of more magical forces, not really organic. And they then establish the next step that they're going to have to take, which is they find up at the far end there are 3 sockets which look like something needs to be inserted into it by an area that looked as if it was being used as some sort of pagan altar. So they've worked out the next steps, and they've worked out that they need to learn more about this area. Are there any legends? Was there some sort of object with 3 prongs on it? Were there 3 sisters who each held a stave or something like that? They're going to have to spend another season looking into this. Problem is, the person they want to spend the season looking into it, the person who's best to wander the area and search monastic chronicles and talk to people, is the surgeon who they really need to stay here and stop their hideously butchered people dying. So their attempts to then get further are slowed down through the summer because of all the wounds they've got, and it's not until the autumn that they then make another sort of scholarly foray to find out what they can learn from chronicles, records and so forth, either here or further afield out in Burgundy, which is the neighbouring county. So the investigations go very differently for both. The farmers pretty well ignore the purpose of them being here. They don't really pursue those investigations, whereas the shadows get really into it, but they put themselves in a lot of jeopardy, kind of deliberately, really, partly because they had such specialised mages they couldn't deal with ghosts, and partly because they tried to avoid damaging things with fire in the hopes that they'd gather some magical goodies, which they did. And so their ability to deal with other issues was hampered by the way that they'd approached the investigations proactively. Now, while one of our groups of players is proactively investigating the ruins and the issues around the ruins, what else is happening in the county? This is our Act 1. This is where we set the scene, make sure that the players are familiar with everything that's happening before things start changing radically. And so one of the first things that happens at the beginning of spring is that there is a theft in the city of Dosson, or just outside the city of Dosson. Somebody claims he was robbed on the road. And both sets of our characters here have done a great job investigating the theft of some relics. It's not unreasonable that the steward at the Count's castle, a man called Arnaud Deveau, will ask them to look into what the motives might be behind this theft. Now, without going into the step-by-step investigation and all the encounters, the purpose of this is mainly to make sure that the players have plenty of opportunity to talk to and establish relationships with the merchants and the important people within the city. Because they've already had plenty of opportunity to impress their local peasants, to talk to the nobles, to talk to the counts, and so forth, right? So this is where we put that last piece of the puzzle in and make sure that they've got the opportunity to establish relationships with the merchants, the city folk. But there are some interesting little moral dilemmas for them, which of course the players handle totally differently. So they discover that there was a completely hopeless bloke who belonged to the woman whose silver was stolen. He had attempted to steal it because he thought then his girlfriend would run away with him and they would be able to start a new life. His girlfriend had no desire to run away with him whatsoever. So when he turns up at the household where she lives with a load of silver and says, "Great, just look after this. I'm going to pretend I was robbed, right? And then tomorrow we can leave and start a new life." She's like, "I don't want to start a new life with you, but I don't really want to be here either. And I have got a lot of silver that I'm looking at." So you've got one idiot thief deliberately stealing stuff, and one perhaps slightly foolish thief who desperately wants to get out of the city and is given an opportunity. So it doesn't matter politically how the players deal with this, but it's a nice little dilemma. Once they uncover this, they're going to have to work out how to recommend that these miscreants are dealt with. They're going to have to decide whether they even want to reveal both of them. And of course, both of our groups handle this differently. So our farmers are super sentimental about it. They're a little bit lacking in confidence, so they keep the local authorities like Arnaud Deveau completely in the loop as to what they're doing, so they can't really cover it up because they end up leading the authorities to the miscreants. But they do argue that the girl was just a bit stupid and made one rash decision and it wasn't really her plan and she hadn't stolen the silver. And they end up taking her in as one of their servants. So they've now got this slightly clueless, slightly romantic, slightly naive ex-farm girl who'd then become a servant in the city. And they've taken her in. And that's kind of nice because it gives a bit more backstory to somebody who would be a very minor part of their settlement. And it very much reflected their kind of sentimentality. They felt sorry for her. The Shadows did not really feel sorry for anyone. They were quite happy to hand over the idiot who staged the robbery in the first place to get him hanged. But for the girl, they didn't tell anyone about the girl. They just said, "Oh, he's staged this, he's left it here. This girl has obviously run with it. But we can't find the girl. We've checked out her hamlet where she came from, the farming community where she grew up, and she doesn't seem to be there." Well, that was because they'd tipped her off. Because they went down to the farming community and they said to them, "We know exactly what's happened. you owe us. We're going to keep quiet. So they've now got a group of farmers who've got a nice windfall of silver down near Cornard Castle in the south of the county, who they've covered up for. And this is just the shadows all over, right? This is them building up slightly dodgy people who owe them debts, right? Who they do favours for. And there's no real sentimentality there. So that was the spring. There was a little bit of stolen silver. Through the rest of the year, there's a couple of other things that happen. Some of it is proactive. So the players know, because it's in the player's book, there's mention of these rumours, that there's something about the grandfather oak, that the locals kind of revere it or respect it in some way. They know there's a ghost story around the Lac de Lille. Different groups decide to look into different legends and ignore others. The farmers weren't particularly interested in a ghost story in the far north, whereas a weird oak, that's right up their street. The shadows, on the other hand, aren't that bothered if a bunch of peasants revere an oak. That's not interesting to them. But that ghost story sounded intriguing. The problem they had is that the ghost story around the Lac de Lille, which isn't a ghost, is really a story of honesty and sincerity and friendship. And our shadows are not honest, sincere, or friendly. So their own motives tripped them up, and there was only so far they could get with that. But they start at the same time to get a sense that there are real threats here, that there is something stirring. So small creatures, sort of mutated little creatures, which look a lot like a small demon in a medieval illuminated manuscript. Obviously, that was our inspiration for it. These little demonic imp-like creatures are lurking around significant places. All of the castles, the convent near them, and their ruins. Now, they spot the one near their ruins. They didn't have to. The Mithras group never even noticed that there was a demonic creature spying on them. Like, for the whole of the rest of the campaign, there's a demonic creature spying on the Mithras group because they didn't notice. But both of these two groups, the Shadows and the Farmers, have set up magical defences. They've got guards. So a guard notices this creature trying to get through the magical defences, and they respond to it. They hunt it down. They then find out that it sort of broke its way out of a pot. They track down where that pot came from, who left the pot there, etc., etc., etc. And eventually, both groups find their way to a spot which, on the map, we see way off near Guay Castle, towards the edge of the map. There's some wetlands. And off in this stinking, fetid swamp, there's a bunch of ne'er-do-wells, basically thieves, petty thieves. Remember right at the beginning, a cut purse who snatched a purse and ran, and in both cases in this campaign got away. She's there, and there's a few other ne'er-do-wells who are being blackmailed because their petty crimes could be revealed by somebody who somehow knows about their petty crimes. They're being blackmailed into guarding this odd ritual space where these jars are placed, and they're kind of like eggs, and they gestate, and then the pots are placed out in different places and the creatures hatch out of them. Now, both groups work this out. They follow the source of the jars. They discover this sort of weird hatchery, this sort of infernal hatchery for the creatures in the jars. Now, different groups get to different places with this. Again, the Mithras group actually worked out who'd been creating the jars. They never proved it, but they worked out who it was. They got a bit further with the investigation. Whereas the Shadows and the Farmers didn't quite get that far. But both of them did get to a point of reaching the swamp, confronting and overcoming the thieves, and then working out what was going on from that point. That was where they both diverged. They both followed the breadcrumbs. They both basically solved the mystery, not as thoroughly as the Mithras group did, but fairly thoroughly. But then they did something totally different. So the Farmers who are, as you're getting the sense, slightly lacking in confidence and very, very happy to have help from outside, go straight back to the city of Dossel. And they've got the thieves with them. And on the way out from the city, as they're approaching the gate, here comes a group of the city guard led by a bloke called Raymond de Alba, who is a young knight who is in the Count's service. And he says that he's received a tip-off that there's brigands hiding in the wetlands and he's on the way out to fetch them. And who are those people you've got with you? The player character at this point don't twig that this is really suspicious. This is really suspicious timing, that these brigands, whatever they are, have been hiding in that swamp for the last 2 months, slowly hatching these eggs, these pots. And now, just as they get seized, somebody who they might be suspecting is a bit dodgy already, this Raymond de Alba, comes out and goes, "Oh yes, I'm going to arrest them. I'll take them off your hands." So they hand them over. And Raymond takes them back to the city, and the Count is currently away, so Raymond oversteps his authority a little bit and says, "Oh, I'll have them executed," and has them locked up pending an execution. But strangely, there's a jailbreak, and they somehow get out. And now the players start freaking out a bit, because the way the jailbreak works is a child who nobody can identify came into the guard room, told the guard, the child looked like a servant, told the guard that he was needed somewhere else, at the front gate, whatever, and then unlocked the door and let this lot go. Okay. So the player characters, knowing that they're injured, that one of these was injured from the fight in the wetlands, managed to chase her down and capture her. The others get away. So the player characters get a bit more information, and they then go to the cathedral. They don't hand her back over to the secular authorities. They go to the cathedral and say, "There's something really bad happening. There's these demonic creatures. It's really suspicious that this person got out." And so they end up talking to the archdeacon, who's like the bishop's second in command, and a local exorcist. The bishop's sort of preferred exorcist is called. And the players end up in alliance with the archdeacon and the exorcist. They arrange for the woman to be given sanctuary until she can say everything that she's understood to know. Maybe she can help identify the person who hired her, whose name she doesn't know, and so forth. And this brings the player characters into an alliance with several people at the cathedral. And they're really happy for the help. And so they tell the exorcist what's been going on, about these sort of little spy imp creatures that have been prowling around, and the exorcist takes up the role of heading around all the local places which are known to have been infected, to have one of these imps dropped off, having a jar placed near them, and ensures that they're properly cleansed. So the players are really happy with this, and they've now got allies that they're working with. The shadows handled this completely differently. They get to the same point at the end of the breadcrumb trail. They get to the wetlands, they get to the thieves. They've got their flambeau mage with them, and he still likes creating lots of fire, so there aren't quite as many survivors this time round. But there are a couple of survivors, and so what they do is they round them up, they get them to explain exactly what's been going on, they get as much information as they can from them and say, "Right, now you've got a choice. We either take you back to the city and hand you over, and you can presumably be burnt at the stake for blasphemy for this horrible site that you've been guarding, or we'll let you go. But we'll take a small surety from you, a small security to make sure we can find you again, and you will owe us a favour." Right? It's their MO all over. Obviously, the two survivors who've just seen their friends incinerated and don't really want to get burnt at the stake for blasphemy, if this does turn out to be blasphemy, and it does sound like it, they're up for this. They're not happy when the player characters sever the left small little finger from the left hand of each one of them. But of course, our player characters want an arcane connection to each of them, so they take a little finger from each. And then they let them go. They just say, "Don't go back to the city. Leave." Then the player characters, the shadows, having worked out that these pots have been dropped off at these various places, they don't make an alliance with anybody else to help deal with this problem. They make sure that they are the people doing favours for the nobles. And this could get really repetitive, so after the first one or two castles, we just end up abstracting it to like a leadership role. But the idea is that they're now going to go around all the places where these pots have been dropped off, say, look, we've discovered this, we don't want it to be public unless you want to make it public. This is your home that's being violated by these creatures, up to you. But we're keeping quiet about this, but we're here to help. We can get rid of this creature, get rid of these creatures. And they can. So they now do favours for all of the local castles, which have got these little creatures that have been dropped off there. They do a favour for the local convent. They get rid of a creature from there. So this is all looking very good for the shadows as they stay in the darkness, as they lurk on the side. They don't make alliances. They just deal with it themselves, and they use this as a way to make friends, right, or to get people who owe them favours. Now, although this is still Act 1, and therefore we're still setting the scene before all the big changes happen in Act 2, still the players' actions, or their characters' actions, are having quite a big effect on what's happening. So, for example, there's the tension between the Count with his castle in Dosson and the Baron of Montrat to the north of the player characters' ruins. And of course, not coincidentally, the player characters are exactly between these two, right? They are stuck in the crossfire. But for the farmers have made this worse, because the farmers have humiliated and publicly condemned the Baron, who's been told he has to pay this absolutely huge amount of silver. And then they don't really improve matters, because what happens is that the Count sends a couple of envoys, and the envoys are told, go up to that Baron, tell him he's going to have to swear fealty, tell him he owes the money, hint that he won't have to pay the fine so long as he actually properly gives fealty and starts obeying me. Right? That's what the Count wants. The Count doesn't want a big pile of silver that he knows doesn't exist. He wants loyalty and he wants fealty. So the envoys go up to tell this incredibly bad-tempered, angry Baron that he's going to have to swear fealty, and they can use the silver as leverage. They don't want to do this. This is a terrible idea. The lead envoy, his wife is currently sleeping with a Count. She's become his mistress. So he's not even in a particularly good mood in terms of serving the Count. He doesn't want to get killed for the man who's currently sleeping with his wife. So they're demotivated. They're looking at facing an angry Baron with a bit of a reputation for violence. They stop off at the ruins on the way up. And they say, oh, this is going to be very difficult. We're not directly asking you for help, but it would be great if somebody helped us. Our farmers, if there's a fence, they'll sit on it. So they say, well, we'll take you up. We'll take you up there so that you can find the path, but we're not getting involved in this conversation. And if you get attacked, we're not even going to help you. Like, just flat out. We'll do the absolute minimum so as not to appear completely rude, but we're not going to help. So they go up. The Baron is absolutely livid, tells them all to clear off with a flea in their ear. And on the way back, the group is attacked. A completely half-hearted attempt to kill the lead envoy. Now, there are various reasons why somebody might want to kill the lead envoy. Maybe the fact that his wife is sleeping with the Count. Perhaps his wife wants him out of the way, for example. Perhaps somebody's trying to put the Baron of Montrat in a bad light. Make it look like he's attacked these people after they went up to talk to him. But our players don't necessarily think of this. They realise they're being attacked. They go into a defensive posture. The attackers, having wounded the envoy, flee. And the players just go, well, okay, come on back with us to our ruins and we'll tend to your wounds. So they don't pursue particularly the attackers. They make a little bit of an effort, but it's pretty half-assed. They don't pursue the attackers. They don't find out what the real motivation for the attack was. And this allows the rumour to spread that the Baron of Montrat attacked the envoys. So things are now really bad. And towards the end of autumn, what happens here is that the Count sends a more heavily armed negotiating force, basically about 200 soldiers, 200 to 300 soldiers, split into two columns, one up each side of the river, to position themselves in a siege posture around the Baron's castle so that they can then speak to him and say, we're here with far more force than you can hope to fight. You've really bitten off more than you can chew. Capitulate. They do not appreciate just how stubborn the Baron is. The Baron just sits there and goes, it's going to start snowing soon. It's autumn. I've got plenty of food and I've got quite a strong fortress. You might outnumber me 10 to 1, but come and try it. So the Baron calls the Count's bluff. The Count has to retreat. Now, at this point, the player characters have a very entertaining, how should we put this? Not disagreement, not that the players are actually disagreeing with each other. They just go off in different directions. Because while Guichard ex Bonasagas, the very sensible farmer, doesn't want to get involved, Adele, who is the woman with the archery skill and the joy in horsemanship, volunteers to help the Count. So she takes one of the guards without asking the mages or the people who are supposed to be in charge, and just goes and helps with this, what's effectively a siege camp, for about 2 weeks while negotiations fail to proceed. So this damages their relationship with the Baron of Montrat, who hears that this strange woman, because it's the Middle Ages, it's not that usual for champion archers on horseback to be female. But this strange woman from the ruins has been helping. He's already in a bad mood with them. The Count, on the other hand, is quite impressed. They're not expected to help. They're not knights. They don't owe any sort of service in terms of military service. And yet 2 of their people joined his army for no reward. So this has an unexpected political impact. As relations with the Count and the Baron collapse completely, the players find themselves absolutely on the side of the Count, because things were looking bad with the Baron in the first place, and now Adele and one of the guards have gone off and thrown their lot in with the Count. Now compare this with what happens with the Shadows. This is completely different. The Shadows things aren't quite so bad with the Count and the Baron. The Count still wants the Baron to swear fealty, but there's no fine owed or anything like that. So the envoys that are sent up aren't in quite so much fear of the Baron's reaction. They're not going to be making such strong demands. But still, they stop off at the ruins and they kind of hint that they might quite like some sort of aid. And the players are minimally polite. They say, oh, well, we'll make sure you find the right path. We'll send a couple of people who can go with you up towards the hills and make sure that you get the right path up to the castle. But they pointedly do not offer to guard them or negotiate on their behalf, because they're putting together some quite good relations with the Baron of Montrat. Now, 2 guards do take them most of the way and then stop. But there's also a third character that's gone up, and this is Vindissa ex Tremere, who we'd mentioned before. And she also goes, but invisibly. And when they get to the castle, she eavesdrops on the conversation. And when they leave and they go back and they're ambushed on the way back, she does not reveal herself. But when the 2 inept assassins wound but fail to kill the Count's envoy, she does pursue one of them and she paralyses him. And then she goes further south and she gets help from the ruins to come back, because while she's incredibly competent in many ways, she's not physically that strong. She doesn't want to carry this guy back. She goes and gets a couple of people from the ruins who will then take this paralysed person back to the ruins. And what do they find? The paralysed person is missing a finger. They have the little finger of this person. These 2 assassins are the 2 people who they let go from the wetlands, and they're being blackmailed again. So now our Shadows are getting further into this conspiracy. The person who initially blackmailed those thieves to be in the wetlands has now blackmailed them to attack the envoy. And they think that they were told to kill the husband of the Count's mistress. So now our shadows are starting to suspect that maybe the Count's mistress is behind this, now trying to get her own husband out of the way. So what do our shadows do with this information? Do they take the prisoner up to the Baron and say, look, we found this man who killed the envoys who visited you. Maybe someone's trying to frame you. Perhaps you'd like to take control of the prisoner and now you can control that narrative. Do they go down to Dosson and say, we have seized one of the assailants that attacked the envoy of you, my Lord Count, and you can interrogate him and find out what he was really doing? Nah, they let him go. So they say to him, look, you want to be free. You don't want to be blackmailed anymore by whoever this weird, mysterious woman is who's blackmailing you. And we want to know who she is. So the deal is, you will go free with one of our people. The two of you will travel together and you will see if you are contacted by this woman again. And that way we get to find out who she is. If we can get her off your back, you are now free of her blackmail. And what we get out of this is we know who's behind this conspiracy, or we get a step closer to finding out who's behind this conspiracy, which we're starting to suspect is unfolding. And the prisoner is like, oh, I stopped listening when you said you let me go. Yeah, let me go. Great, fine, someone's coming with me, I don't care. So off one of the player characters goes with this guy. They disappear off for a while. And the Count is still upset with the Baron of Mondrat, because as far as the Count's concerned, the Baron is still not swearing fealty, and his envoy has been attacked. So again, same as with the farmers, with the shadows, the Count sends an army. Now this is not necessary. If we pause for a minute and think about our Mithras group worked out, you know, they acted as the envoys' bodyguards, and they captured the people who were attacking and took them back to Dosson, gave them to the Count. And you'll remember that from the first video, our Mithras group, there was never any demand of silver from the Count to the Baron. So for the Mithras group, the Count doesn't raise an armed force and march it north. So this never happens because of the player character's actions. But for the shadows, as for the farmers, we've now got an armed force going north. And what do our shadows do? Well, they see an opportunity to cement an alliance with the Baron. And they go to the Baron and say, do you want us to kill the besiegers? And the Baron's like, well, they've camped outside of bow range, outside of crossbow range. I can't hit them from here. What are you going to do? It's like, you don't need to know, my Lord Baron. But if you wish, we will get rid of this threat for you. You can just kill them all if you want. Right, the Baron's kind of freaking out at this point. He wants to send a message. So he's like, well, don't kill them all, but if you can break the siege, you will certainly have earned my friendship. Player characters, the shadows, are like, brilliant. We want an alliance with the Baron of Mondrat. Now, they've still got Vindissa ex Tremere. And you'll remember that she can turn herself invisible and float, and she can control human bodies. She's also got a spell which allows her, at sight range, to cause a human body to float upwards at the same speed as smoke for 2 minutes. And then the spell ends, and they're quite a long way up. So, she makes herself invisible, and each night she goes out over the castle walls. It's kind of hard for her to get out, not invisible, since by this stage the place has been besieged. And when somebody wanders a little bit away from the rest of their group, a guard, a sentry perhaps, she will cast the spell that she has that paralyses them, and then she casts the spell that makes them rise 2 minutes upwards. At a distance, she's not guaranteed to hit every time, but she's invisible in the dark. It's not as if it matters if she misses a couple of times. And with Ars Magica, if you're good enough at a spell, you're not even going to get tired casting it. So she can just spend a happy half hour out in the woods, picking off the occasional target. Because they're paralysed, they can't scream. The first thing anybody knows is when there's a sickening crunching noise of a corpse hitting the ground, or a live person becoming a corpse as it hits the ground, having just fallen a couple 100 metres. So over the next few nights, the siege camp starts absolutely freaking out. Because people just keep dying in the night. They've got no idea why. They just have these battered, broken corpses that are found. And then the players decide that they're going to go for one of the leaders of the besieging army. And that obnoxious little oik, Raymond de Alba, seems like a reasonable one to go for. Raymond de Alba is supposed to be one of the leaders of this conspiracy, and he's not supposed to die until the end of Act 3. No, the shadows ensure that his broken, battered corpse is dumped in a ravine, and oh, that's an interesting sword you've got, we'll have that. So one of our arch conspirators is now dead in a ravine with his magical sword stolen, courtesy of the shadows. And that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely brilliant. That's exactly the sort of thing that we're expecting players to do in this campaign. We want them to do weird things that take control of the direction of the plot. Obviously, this breaks the siege, and the besieging army retreats. And the player characters have done this without the Count realising that it's them. Right? So the Baron of Montrat is now an ally. The Count doesn't know they were responsible for the mysterious deaths. And they're now monitoring somebody who they think is a pawn of the conspirators, and they expect to be contacted again by the conspirators. Now, they don't even stop here, because what then happens, and we'll just mention this as the last thing, is as we get to the end of Act 1 and we go into Act 2, Arnaud de Vaux, the steward at Dosson Castle, is conducting his own investigation into the strange things that have been happening, and the conspirators decide to remove him. They murder him. Now, what's supposed to happen, according to the campaign book, is that the player characters track down the least important of the conspirators, and as they're getting the least important of the conspirators to confess, a demon strikes, materialises in front of them, kills the conspirator before he can say so too much, and the player characters fight the demon, kill the demon. They've had their first confrontation with a scary infernal force. They definitely know there's a conspiracy involved here. And now we transition into Act 2. And for example, with the D&D group, that's exactly what happened. Now, with the farmers, they never actually worked out who the conspirators were, and they never faced that demon. But they did realise that something supernatural had killed Arnaud de Vaux. The shadows do get as far as confronting the lesser of these conspirators, and they do nearly get him to confess. Now, their plan is that they're probably going to blackmail him. They're probably not going to reveal his complicity, but the demon strikes, the demon kills him. They then fail to kill the demon. This is partly because the best way they would have had to kill the demon is to start an absolutely enormous fire, which in the middle of a town is probably a bad idea, and they didn't really want to get in trouble for arson in the middle of the city, so they're really limited in how they can fight the demon. It gets away. But they do work out that there was this conspiracy. They realise a demon was summoned, and the demon killed Arnaud de Vaux. But what do they do with this information? They go to Belmont Castle, and they find his stepmother, the woman who brought him up, and they tell her. And then they go to Grief Castle, and they find his brother, and they tell him. And they get these two together and say, this is what we know. We can tell the Count if you want. We can tell the Bishop if you want. We can tell anybody you want. But it was your kinsman who died. Here's the proof. Here's what happened. Now what do you want to do? And so our shadows have now extended their alliance. They've now got Montrat Castle, Belmont Castle, and to a certain extent Grief Castle. They've got all these people thinking that they are, their great saviour and help. In one case because of the siege, and the other for discovering the conspiracy that murdered a member of the family of both Belmont Castle and Grief Castle. And so the shadows are kind of playing it this way. While the farmers, if you remember, are still in alliance with an exorcist and the archdeacon and so forth. So at this point, the players in different groups, our farmers and our shadows, are aligned with completely different people. Right? In one case, they're hostile to the Baron of Montrat. In the other case, they're allied to the Baron of Montrat. In one case, they're allied with various churchmen at the cathedral. In the other case, they are weaving a sort of subtle web of alliances in the darkness without getting anyone from the church involved. Now, this is still Act 1. So the big changes haven't yet occurred. The big dramatic events haven't yet occurred. The death of Arnaud de Vaux is kind of the first of them. But there will be more. And we can see, even during the setup phase of Act 1, that if we give the players this freedom, They can set their own agendas, their own alliances. Their actions get to decide whether a castle is besieged or not. They get to decide who owns these important relics, which will become important later again, and so forth. So that is Act 1 of House of the Crescent Sun, and that gives a sense of the way in which, during the setup, different groups of players can change the story and the alliances and the political landscape. And by the end, by the time we get to Act 3, these group stories have very little in common with each other. But if you play the campaign, you'll find out how your players pursue this one, and everyone's story will be unique and hopefully just as entertaining.